here. So we're joined today by Susan Fauman, who is an artist who works out of New York, upstate New York, right?
Technically not, technically Hudson Valley. I'm not quite upstate.
Oh, okay. Valley area. Okay. Yeah, it's really cool that you can join us from so far away, from 10 hours away. We get to see you and talk to you. So if you want to, Susan, you can go ahead and turn the screen over to you and we can start chatting about you and your jewelry life.
Hi, Pippa, welcome.
Oh, Pippa's here. Hi, Pippa.
Yay. Hi, Pippa.
There she is. Oh, she's connecting. So you're originally from Ann Arbor, correct?
No.
No.
So I was born in Chicago, and then when I was 3, we moved to Huntington Woods, which is right outside of Detroit. And then when I was 13, we moved to Baltimore. And then when I was in college at Oberlin in Ohio, my family moved back to Michigan, partly because my sister was starting at U of M. So my parents now live in Ann Arbor and have been there since whenever that is. What year is that, Mom? Some time ago. So they've been there now for over 20 years.
Okay. And did you go to U of M?
No, I went to Oberlin.
Okay. What did you study? What did you study?
Printmaking and photography. And right after school, and I had there was a portion of, thanks Mom, 1987 we moved. So there was a whole curriculum at Oberlin called Expo, Experimental College, and it was classes that were taught by students. And so junior year of college, I took a metalsmithing. We didn't have a metals department. I took a metalsmithing class with another student and fell in love with metalsmithing and just kind of dabbled in it off and on, and then graduated with a degree in photography and making, and then worked as an AmeriCorps volunteer for a nonprofit in California. Actually, before that is when I moved to Ann Arbor to take a sort of a gap year before starting my life, and I was actually hit by a car. I was waiting to work at a photo finishing place, and I was hit by a car on 4th and I can't remember what else, somewhere in Ann Arbor. And
was it pedestrian?
I was on a bicycle.
Oh, you're on a bicycle.
And this guy was from out of town. He was in a big SUV, and he turned a corner without really checking where he was going. He plowed into me. And my physiatrist at University of Michigan was one of Catherine's best friends. And she said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a waitress." And she said, "Well, no, but what do you do? What do you actually do?" And I said, "Well, I'm an artist, and I make jewelry. I really want to make jewelry." She introduced me to Stephen and Catherine. And so that was in 2000, 99 or 2000. No, that was 98, because I had just graduated from college. And so I designed the first ever, Catherine hired me on the spot. I designed the first ever Abra website. And there she is, unmuted, so maybe she could fill in some details from that.
She didn't just design the first Abra website. She went to the library and taught herself code when no one was doing any of that. And yeah, so it was a Susan moment. While swallowing fire and swords, she was also teaching herself code and building our website.
That's right. So I was working at a cocktail, a martini bar, which I don't think is in Ann Arbor anymore, and doing some fire swallowing and tricks like that. Such is life. And and then Catherine and Stephen both really encouraged me to use my sort of off time to do some bench work and make jewelry, start making jewelry again. And I had a very small trunk show at a store down the corner called, it was a custom speaker shop at the time, which I don't think is there anymore. Noah's under.
It's now Leon Loft, and they're a huge thing, and we still are in work with them. Paul Hickman did framing for a lot of their custom speakers, and they have a national broadcast of live music several times a month when anyone is in town, and they do a radio broadcast from there of Acoustic Cafe. It's a national, yeah.
Yeah, so I had a little trunk show there, and that funded some travel. So I took off for Europe for about almost 6 months, 5 months, just doing the boho backpacking thing. And I came back to Ann Arbor, and very soon after that moved to California to be an AmeriCorps volunteer. And I kind of left jewelry behind at that point. It was sort of, it just didn't fit in. I worked for a nonprofit that was doing oral history for a community in Oakland called Fruitvale. So I was the project photographer, and I also helped conduct the interviews and helped the designer design the experiment, and then the exhibit. And then I didn't really get back to making jewelry in a significant way until my sister got married in 2014. She hired me to make the jewelry for the bridesmaids, and funded some tools, and I kind of dove right back in. And I'd been saying all of that time. So in between the nonprofit work and getting back into making jewelry, I dove really deeply into yoga and herbal healing through the Ayurvedic lens. So Ayurveda, people like to call it the sister science to yoga. And it really looks at how our individual makeup, our individual constitution affects our health, and how we are affecting our health by making good or bad choices. And it was a deep dive that I loved and still love and still am deeply informed by in my design process. But throughout all of those years, so from essentially 2000 until 2014 or 2013, I was kind of longing to get back to making, really missing it, making things here and there, sewing, doing whatever else I could do, and really sort of longing to get back to making jewelry. So my sister kind of takes me back.
Yay, sister.
Yes.
So when you were first making jewelry in 1999, or circa 1999, were those just techniques that you had learned in that metal smithing class in Oberlin? So
that's actually a good question. The summer after that first class at Oberlin, I took 2 classes at Maryland Institute College of Art. And then from there, yeah, everything was just sort of experimentation. So I've never had I've had formal training, because at this point now I've been twice to Penland, which is an incredible craft school in North Carolina, and only for 3 weeks total, but it's such an intensive structure that you really learn a lot in that time. So I've just sort of pieced stuff together, YouTube videos, a lot of failing to success. And just kind of upping the game each time. So getting a little bit more bold, getting a little bit more willing to experiment with more expensive materials here and there. And just recently, very recently, I've added recycling my clients' work, gold in particular. It's not so worthwhile for me to recycle silver, so I send that out still to a reclaimer. But I'll recycle gold, especially if it's got some kind of sentimental value. And that's something that, yeah, I just kind of experimented my way into and read about and looked up videos.
What was it like after that break of, like 12 years or so? What was it like to go back to it and make pieces for your sister and for a wedding, for such a big event?
I mean, I look back at them now, and it was like, it feels pretty elementary what I did for her. They were, I was working, my husband at the time we lived in campus housing on the Bard campus, and I had there was a little alcove at the top of our stairway. And so I was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a milk crate in front of me with a tabletop on top of that, and my hammer and my anvil. And so I was really kind of limited to I was using a little butane kitchen torch. And in fact, I've only recently graduated to an oxypropane torch, to a proper jeweler's torch. I was using propane and a big propane plumber's torch and a butane torch up until about 8 or 10 months ago.
Wow.
But I was pretty limited. So it was very accessible. It was very much stuff that you could kind of do at your kitchen table if you just bought a few supplies, which was what was nice about it, right? Because it's very accessible. But at some point, if you want to sort of up the game, you have to changed the situation. So for a long time, so I bought my house last March, and I converted the garage, which you'll see in the video, into a studio space. And up until then, I was working in like a glorified closet pantry off of the kitchen of the house we were living in. And then we lived in Canada for a year, and I was working on our balcony for a while until it got and then I worked in a blacksmith shop. I found a little corner of a blacksmith shop to work in for about 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, you definitely have a lot of drive to make something.
Yeah, right.
So where do you find the inspiration to get your specific designs?
So it kind of comes from all over the place. The very initial iteration of my business was very, very heavily influenced by yogic philosophy and by this idea of the 5 elements. So the 5 elements being earth, water, fire, wind, and space. And in Ayurvedic and yogic philosophy, each of the elements has a very specific energetic signature, I guess you could say. So earth is about stability and about regularity, and water is about nourishment, and fire is about transformation, and wind is about movement and activity and inspiration, actually, and space is sort of about hosting all of those other qualities. And so I was looking, at first I was quite literal. There's actually all of the stuff around sacred geometry is related to the 5 elements. And so there's some quite literal geometric forms you can use to designate to denote a particular element. But as time went on and I got a little bit more of a sort of sensitivity and feel for the gemstones and the materials, I started to be a little bit more freeform with it. So I would say sometimes I sit down and sketch, but it's pretty rare. Most of the time I just get right into the materials. A lot of the time I'm inspired by the stones. Mm-hmm. And I have a very particular feel for stones. Whether or not it's what everyone's cup of tea is another question, but it's very easy for me to say, yes, this one, no, this one. Mm-hmm. And especially right now, it's kind of interesting because I've been doing so much of my purchasing online. I go to Tucson every year, which is the big gem show, but and I spend plenty of money there too. But it's so I start with that as my sort of inspiration. The stones is my inspiration. Although sometimes, I mean, it's varied. Sometimes I play with. So for a couple of years now, there's a major holiday in Hindu culture called Navaratri, which is a celebration of the mother goddess in all of her manifestations. And it's a 10-day celebration. And so each year for the past 3 years, for each of those 10 days, I've taken the particular flavor of how mother goddess shows up on that day and use that as inspiration for either a small collection of pieces or a single piece. And that is really fun. And I tell the story of the mythology of over that 10 days through my social media. And that's really engaging and people really enjoy it. And it's just really fun for me to tell a story that way. So a lot of times I would say that my inspiration is story, maybe. Mm-hmm. And I do a fair bit of working with people where I'll do a custom piece for them, but it's never them sending me an image saying, make this for me. It's always, here's what I'm trying to inspire or embody. What do you want to make for me? And I'll usually say to them, send me 3 pictures from my social media of something that you've liked, so that I have this just at least a sense of what direction to move in.
That's nice. So someone can just send you like words or adjectives, and then you start from there.
Sure. Or, what are they working on? I just finished a ring set for an old friend who's going through a pretty major life transition, and she had really loved this set of actually stacker rings that I'd made that were inspired by the 5 elements a few years ago. And so I made her this really, maybe I'll show them in a couple minutes, a sort of abstracted version of that ring set, and they're beautiful. I'm really, really excited about them. And she sent me her childhood ID bracelet, which was 14 karat gold, and that I alloyed that with some 22 karat gold to create 18 karat gold, and then milled that and created this ring set for her.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It sounds like a really intimate experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. So I know you were just telling us how you've worked at home for many years in a lot of different ways. A lot of us are new to working at home, but a lot of us are finding ourselves having to work at home right now. Do you have any tips for us?
A good question. I found, especially since we've been quarantined, and I wasn't as good about this before quarantine, but especially since quarantine, I've been really, really, really regular about getting whatever my morning practice routine is in before I go out to my studio space. And I'm lucky because the studio is actually physically outside, so there's a 30-second commute, but it does feel physically separated enough that I don't feel like I'm at work until I, get out the door with my mug and my headphones. So I would say there's an incredible abundance right now of resources online of physical movement practices. For me, I have a meditation practice that's very, very, very regular. And then I almost always also have some kind of movement that I'll do after that, which can mean up to 2 hours before, or more, 2.5 hours before I'm even eating breakfast. So maybe that's too much for some people, but going for a walk, doing something to mark this morning time and sort of shake off sleep and give yourself the sense that you've created a routine. Routine is probably the most important part of working for yourself. And I probably have worked for myself. I mean, with the exception of Abra, I've worked for myself pretty much my entire adult life. And that's one of the most important aspects of my sanity. I'd also say podcasts are amazing.
Do you usually listen to something while you're working?
I usually listen to podcasts. Sometimes I'll do music if I just feel like I don't want to be having words in my head. But especially since the most recent sort of social uprising, I've been really taking the opportunity to educate myself. And there's a few podcasts that I found extremely, extremely helpful for educating myself around the history of racism in this country. And I've also been thinking a lot about how to make shifts in my business so that, it's hard as a sole proprietor because I don't have employees. I don't have, but I can think more broadly about how my materials and my work impacts the environment and impacts bodies. And so I've been thinking a lot about how to source my materials in a way that is more environmentally and human conscious. And that's actually was the main inspiration behind moving into recycling metal, because the mining industry, as we all know, is pretty horrible on Black and Brown communities and the environment. And so probably the very most eco way that we can work with fine metals is by recycling. Gemstones are harder. Gemstones are harder, especially because I'm working with semi-precious. I'm not working with diamonds and rubies and emeralds, within which there is a very well-established, it's small, but it's a well-established industry of eco-conscious gemstone mining. In the semi-precious world, that's not anywhere near as well-established yet. But I'm working with a couple of people like Columbia Gem House, who's been for 20 years in the business of doing ethical gem sourcing. I've been talking with him, and I've been talking with some of my suppliers in India to try to really get more transparency into the process.
Sure, that's a job in and of itself.
Yeah, and as you know, being a sole proprietor, I wear all the hats.
Right.
So, yeah. So doing, all of the customer response, all of the interaction. And on one hand, I love that because, as you pointed out, my process is pretty intimate and my work is mostly one of a kind. So there's something that I love about that, but it's a lot.
Yeah. But it's important to try to do that stuff, and it's wonderful to hear that you're thinking about those issues and doing something about it. Even though you are one person, you're trying to make a difference.